I'd like to welcome everybody to the special session on community practice. It's the research oral abstract presentation, and not the first on community-based research, but maybe the first this type of session. I want to welcome everybody to the session, and I want to thank everybody after a very long day for actually being here and joining us as we talk about community practice research. As many of you know, at CAHR, it is a continued long road, but we have gone very far on the road of actually hearing the voices of community and hearing the voices of community-based research. So much so that there is actually a large crowd of mixed people in this audience, many of whom I recognize. Some communities, some research, some clinicians, some all of the above, some of the above. And I think it really reflects the diversity of work that's developed in Canada over the past several years. The reason why we made it a community practice session is partially because we know that a lot of practice research does not neatly fall into the realm of social sciences, whereas some community-based research more easily might. But we wanted to make sure that there was a carved out space for people that were doing research that was addressing the real life realities of people working in communities and people living in communities that wasn't constrained by the bounds of academic social sciences. And we hope to continue this fight for community-based research. I'd recommend that if you are doing your evaluations, and this is something that is important to you, that please do complete your evaluations. The success rate for this session was lower than every other track. Why is that? It's a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is there are a lot of people that submitted stuff to this session. The bad news is there were so many of us submitting things to this session that we had a lower success rate as far as getting an oral versus a poster. So we carved out that space for posters. That was great. We have more work to go. And if you believe there should be a track, or if there should be something special, extra for community-based research, please do indicate that. But a big welcome to everybody who's here. And I'll introduce my other chair.
I'm the good wife.
I thought I get to be the wife this time.
So thank you. I won't have much more to add. You're at the end of the day, and probably your energy is slow, but this is an amazingly inspiring group of people. Thank you on behalf of junior, almost no one researchers like myself, and people living with HIV like myself who've moved up from being a researched person to a researcher. And I think there's some of that in this presentation. So you were going to do the first introductions, but I'm here, so I'll introduce the first person. So the first group is led by Nadia O'Brien as the presenter, and she'll be, and Nadia's somewhere here, right? I saw you outside. Co-presenting, yes, I'm sorry, yes, Tracy Conway. How can I forget that name? I know, don't fire me. Tracy and I just met, but we made friends. This is what happens in community. So they're speaking about ensuring the voices, recognition, and well-being of peer researchers in the application of JIPA and MIWA principles, ethical tensions in conducting research with women living with HIV in Canada. Please come up here, don't be shy.
Do you want to come stand beside me? I want to sit. Excellent. No. That's part of the green is this. Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. So we also wanted to thank the CAHR organizers for creating this space for a valuable and important dialogue on community-based research. We also wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to talk about our work with CHUOS. And on behalf of all of our co-authors, I'll be speaking from the perspective of an academic researcher and an allied researcher as well, and a researcher from Quebec. And my co-presenter, Tracy, from the perspective of a community researcher in Ontario. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that we have gathered on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and to state that we have no conflict of interest to declare. We do, however, have many people to thank. As is the reality of community-based work, the CAHR study relies on the generous and passionate dedication of multitudes of people to do this work, and they are all listed here. Too many to name. So the purpose of our presentation today is to examine the question, what tensions arise when applying JIPA and MIWA principles in community-based research projects with women living with HIV in Canada? Our presentation draws on the experiences and discussions that we as peers, academics, and community researchers have been having as a team in the last 4 years of CHIWOS. CHIWOS is the Canadian HIV Women's Sexual and Reproductive Health Cohort Study. It's a 5-year study that was initiated in 2011 with the aim of investigating if a women-centered care approach could improve the health outcomes of women living with HIV. This study is multi-centered, with sites currently operating in Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, and we will be expanding shortly to Saskatchewan and Manitoba. CHIWOS is also grounded in community-based research principles. Community-based research, as many in the room know, is defined as a collaborative process that dictates the equitable involvement of those affected by the research in the research process. CBI also recognizes the unique strengths that each of these partners bring. In HIV research, these principles are also upheld by the principles of greater involvement of people living with HIV, so JIPA, and the meaningful involvement of women living with HIV, so MIWA. There are also numerous benefits to this approach for the quality of the research and for the communities with which we work. In CHIWOS, our efforts to apply these principles have involved things like creating national steering committees, 3 provincial community advisory boards, and hiring and training over 40 PRAs. On the map here, as you can see by the stars or the yellow, are all of the PRAs located across the country. And in the circles, the interviews that have been conducted. I would like to take this moment to share with you that as of May 1st, 2015, so yesterday, the CHIWOS PRA successfully met the study targets of interviewing 1,400 women. But in conducting this work, we have also met some challenges. And in the spirit of Viviane Namaste's talk from yesterday morning, we agree that it's important to share when we do not have all of the answers. So we want to share with you 3 main tensions that we have experienced in this project. So again, from a researcher perspective, I will speak to the challenges of navigating, recognizing PRA contributions with the need to protect HIV confidentiality. Then, from a community perspective, Tracy will share with us some of the difficulties that we have faced as a project, balancing meaningful involvement with capacity building within our diverse team, and also encouraging PRAs to participate while also ensuring well-being. So one of the key challenges that we have experienced as academic researchers is balancing our desire to recognize PRAs' contributions and the need to protect PRAs' HIV status, which is implied by the title of peer. So the title of peer is important in our work. It signals our community-based research principles and signals to our partners that the voices of these researchers speak with the strength of lived experience. It can also be incredibly powerful in PRA to participant interactions in helping to create ties based on trust and mutual understanding. However, in the context of persisting HIV stigma, increased surveillance, and women's reality of balancing their roles as mothers, employees, employers, and citizens of close-knit and rural communities, HIV disclosure, as implied by the peer role, is not always possible. Specifically, this tension got lived out in a few distinct ways. First, when PRAs hold PRA representative positions in open working groups where membership fluctuates and new introductions occur. Also, in the messaging and flexibility around if, how, and when PRAs must disclose their HIV status to the participants that they interview. And finally, as researchers, when can we present our collaborators as peers? And admittedly, what resultant repercussions does this hold for the perceived legitimacy of our project as a community-based research project? I will now turn it over to Tracy.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about meaningful involvement of women living with HIV, and I think it's really important to recognize that it's not the same for everyone. What's meaningful for me might not be meaningful for someone else. For example, someone simply filling out the survey, that might be something really, really meaningful for them to be actually asked to be a part of a research project and to have their answers direct where we're going to go in the future. And for someone else, it might be to learn some new skills or to become a researcher in their own right, so that there's not a clear definition of what that is for everyone, and we need to remember that as we're working, it'll vary. And She Most definitely has a very diverse team of peer research associates, some who are already researchers, some who are support workers in different organizations, some who are out on the street meeting women where they're at to do the interviews to make sure that they're included in this cohort of women living with HIV. We also need to look a little bit at capacity building and how we learn from mentoring each other, and various opportunities which were developed throughout the CHIWOS project. Ontario has a core research team for individuals that wanted to learn a little bit more about the research project and decide whether that was something they would be interested in. However, as the project was going on, some women felt that their potential was not being used to the best, and that they would like other opportunities. So the national management team has been working on developing other opportunities for women. And recently we've had a knowledge translation and exchange group, which has peer representation from each province. And there is a new PRA-led assessment program. And I think it's also important to recognize that the capacity building is reciprocal, that the researchers actually learn an awful lot from the peers, and that the peers are actually bringing in information that they would never ever be able to get in an office or a different kind of setting, and that without us it wouldn't be able to go on. And I think parts of meaningful involvement must also include self-care and looking after yourself, and knowing what your limits are and when you might need to step back or be triggered or need to have someone to talk to. And the support systems for everyone are going to be a little bit different. One peer research associate might like to talk to her friend or her peer about challenges that she's having. Someone else might want to talk to the provincial coordinator, and others might prefer an on-call counselor who they don't know, so that they can just express what's going on and kind of let it lie. So that these opportunities were worked in throughout the different provinces, so that women had support for themselves, but also resources for the women that they were interviewing. And then I think we always need to talk about compensation. I think certainly women are being paid for their interviews, which is fabulous, because, you know, as someone who volunteered in the HIV field for 20 years, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the work is important and can go on. And I think that there are a lot of benefits in being PRAs, and what we learn from the women that we're interviewing. We're making connections with our community. The women are being able to connect to resources within the community and know they're not alone. And I think moving forward, it's certainly a good start for us. Oh, I went over.
All right. So in closing, various tensions emerge when moving JIPA and MIWA principles to practice. So we suggest that research teams must be flexible, communicative, and creative. I'm just going to go with the slide. We're here. So we're flexible, we're communicative, and creative in order to properly recognize and engage women living with HIV, despite the current context of limited funding, HIV stigma, barriers to disclosure, and intersecting social determinants of health, which impinge on the full realization of JIPA and MIWA. The perspectives and resilience of PRAs on our teams can provide rich insight into these challenges and how best to address them in moving forward. Thank you. I'm going to ask Tracy to stand with me for questions.
We started a little bit late, and this went a little bit over. We probably have time for one question.
Nobody has any questions. Oh, there's one way at the back.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You are talking, or we are talking about meaningful involvement of PHAs in community-based research. I think there's a challenge that exists within the community in the sense that in the recruitment of PRAs, as well as in the recruitment of participants. My question is there an ethical way where PRAs could be recruited independent from service providers? Because the tendency is to recruit PRAs who are service providers. And issues of confidentiality exist because these service providers are the same people who have direct contact with the clients. So issues of credibility of research outcomes. And then closely linked to that is, with regard to meaningfully involving PHAs, don't you think it's strategically recommended that we build the capacities of PHAs in terms of conducting research, as in kind of create a pool of PHAs who can conduct research in the community and not just put the weight or benefit I will call a clique of a few individuals who engage in research continuously and at the same time are service providers.
So I think I understand your question, and I think within CHIWOS, I think we do have some PRAs that do work out of an office, but there's also an awful lot of PRAs that aren't associated with any office or social workers anywhere. So I think we have a little bit of a balance there. Some women actually prefer to go to their social worker, and some would rather go to up here outside of where they work or where they congregate for other things. I don't know, Nadia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tracy. And thank you for your question. I think there's kind of two questions embedded there. So there's one about the diversity of the peers, and that was actually something, and I'm looking to my CHIWOS colleagues, that we did plan for in recruitment, and it's also something when we devise different representative roles, even within CHIWOS, that we have some more experienced PRAs who can mentor PRAs who may have less experience, so building capacity that way. And then there was another part of your question. I'm sorry, I've forgotten now. Does that answer your question? And and the service providers, that's definitely true. I can speak from the perspective of Quebec, and I appreciate your point about the confidentiality. When participants are approached by the CHIWOS project, they have the choice of who they want to be interviewed by. And some participants have chosen to go with a PRA that they know, that's how they feel most safe. And other participants have chosen to actually ask for either a staff or a community member, so a woman living with HIV, but outside of their community, whatever that looks like for that person. And so we appreciate those tensions of community and disclosure and privacy. And so, yeah, thank you. And we're open for questions after this session, too. I know we're tight for time. Thanks.
And because we are doing community-based research and community practice research, I do want to encourage anyone who's able. I know for some people it's a very long day, but I'll be glad to stay an extra few minutes as well so that we can continue our conversations. I next want to introduce, by the way, I don't even know if I introduced myself. I'm Trevor Hart at Ryerson University, and this is my co-chair, Dr. Francisco Ibanez Carrasco, at the OHTN, Ontario HIV Treatment Network. But I want to introduce our next presenters, Hawa Inua and Joan Colas, combining strengths to address the needs of families living with HIV, a clinical institution community-based organization partnership to support families living with HIV.
First and foremost, we would like to thank CAHR organizers for letting us and accepting our abstract and letting us present today. I'm Joanne Colas, social worker at the Children's Hospital in Ottawa, and this is Hawa Inua, support worker at ACO, AIDS Committee of Ottawa. We are here to present the partnership between a clinical setting and a community-based organization. So our objectives were to, CHIO and ACO identified a lack of awareness about people accessing services in the community. CHIO and ACO have worked together for years, but while we were working together, are you going too fast?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry, guys.
We noticed that people that were accessing CHIO were not accessing community services. So that's how the idea came about. Lots of parents in the community were telling us that they were afraid of accessing services in the community. The objective of our program was to break down the stigma and enhance people accessing service in the community. We wanted also to increase awareness and accessibility for the people accessing a clinic to also access community services in the community. So that's how we made it happen. There was lots of brainstorming, lots of talking, lots of organization, and finally we started a partnership with the ACO and CHIO. This is our hospital setting at CHIO. And this is the board in our clinic, as you can see. Awa is listed there, and she's the only one with her name there, so that's how important she is. Put the Awa. And then we have some pictures to show you a bit how we do this together. So in our clinic, Awa sits with us, with the rest of the team, and I go and ask Awa if she would be available to meet a family or a woman who would need to access services at ACO. I always ask the family or the person consent before I talk to Awa, and then we do the introduction where I introduce Awa to the family member. Then we go in a private area and we discuss the needs and we do an assessment of what that person or that family would need and how we can strategize together to come up with a plan to better serve the family. We also provide different community resources, and we also discuss the issues that the person or the family may have. We also, like we said, serve families, children in the community. This is ACO.
Hi, like she said, my name is Hawa Inua. I am the ACB support worker, is African Caribbean support worker at East Community of Ottawa. That's our new home on the 19 Main Street that we moved on December 1st. Okay. Okay, that is ACO. We call that is our living room. And when I go to TO coming back, I meet the family there, and like we ask permission, and I introduce myself, and after that, I ask them if they want to come, like to meet me at ACO, because the challenge is saying that people don't want to come to the AIDS organization because of many factors and many reasons. And as I go to TO, Joan come at ACO. We have once a month support group for the ACB community, and we are sharing the same, like as I go there, she come and meet the families and talk with them if there is any other need that they need with her, or follow my work with them. And also, like every month we meet, the first thing we cook, and we share food together. After we share a story, lesson learned, and kind of I went through something, maybe someone similar went through something, and we just share and exchange, yeah, and support each other one-on-one.
We call this section here the circle of care. That's where we all of the families, we sit together in a circle and they share their story as they feel they are ready to share their story, and we provide support to them. And this is, like you can see in this picture, a prenatal appointment that we had at the clinic, where she attended the clinic, met Awa in the clinic, and then came to ACO and was able to see me there as well and participated in the support group. After 6 months of this, we found out that we had 47 families that came through TO, met with Awa. 22 of these families continues to engage care at ACO. The issues we identified, Awa, you can talk about that.
Yeah, mainly we talk about is mainly families that arrive within maybe 5 years, sometimes even 10, sometimes even more than that. And the need is immigration, we talk about it, access to medication, because some of them are working families, and how they are on trillium, or how to try to put them on, try to find the right treatment plan for them. And also we talk about isolation. Most of the family, even that they are going to TO and they have other issue, other resource, but the thing they don't have is a safe space, comfortable to come and talk about the issue of HIV that concern really. And one of the other things they talk about is food security. Most of the families that I link them with at TO access our food bank. And also we talk about most of them has a childcare issue, transportation. Yeah.
And mental health issues, lots of different mental health issues that we address as well, and we can also refer for further assistance. Types of services that they have at ACO, like Awa just said, is the access to ACO food bank, legal and housing referrals. We have lots of families that are having a hard time, especially, like Awa said, newly immigrants, they have a hard time navigating the system. Housing is always a big issue, and they can certainly have access to a support worker to help them accessing our housing. Health services, support and counseling, and again, harm reduction. There was several challenges. First, it took a long time before we were able to create this partnership. With two organizations, it took a long time for them to come together and actually be able to do the partnership.
I can talk about that one. You know, when it comes to clinical setting and AIDS organization or a community organization, we have two different policy, and hierarchy is really, it's not easy. But if we have the will, it can happen. And you made it. We did it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ensuring confidentiality also was a big concern, so we always have to make sure that confidentiality is our main priority. The clinic space, sometimes it's not ideal. Sometimes it's difficult for Awa to have her space, but we're working on that. And also the increased needs of the families that we meet, but the lack of resources that we have. That's also a big challenge.
Yeah.
Lessons learned, Awa.
Yes, like she's a social worker at TO. I am a support worker, like I said, community worker. And the work that we do, we complement each other. And also, when it comes to partnership, really respect of not stepping on people's toes, because there is a hierarchy, and that is what made that partnership successful, because of people that, as a community worker, working with them as a clinical, like a doctor, a social worker, whatever, they are really like that with me. They didn't feel that they are above, and the respect that they gave it to me is mutual. That is the thing make that partnership really successful. And other thing, connection, you know, as me going to because our session is really full, the other session that has been presented, the PRA, you know, myself also, you know, I am someone that living with HIV, and I did PRA and support worker. The transition is not easy. And when it comes to confidentiality and all that, how draw the line between as someone living and as a worker. And when I come to the clinic, one of the things made it also much easier. When I disclose my studies, people are like, wow, then someone that is there that maybe knows about something that I'm talking about. And the clinicals, they have the clinical experience and the doctors, but when it comes to social life of someone living with HIV, that's as I'm coming in, and really it's come together.
We found in the clinic that when our families, our parents, our mothers were meeting with Awa, they felt they left the clinic empowered. And we tried to break down the stigma to access the services in the community. And that's really the message that we try to leave with those women and those families and those children. These are some quotes that we have from our participants that attend the support group that I attend also on Saturday. It's a Saturday a month. The first one said, it's a woman from Angola who just started to, that she met me as a social worker in the clinic, introduced Awa, and from now on is going to the support group at ACO. And she said that this has been life-changing. There's also a man from Congo, and I'll let Awa explain that. he said, I like this group because it isn't a death support group, but a life support group.
Yeah, you're referring to, when he used to go back home to Congo, every meeting that they had is kind of someone is passed away. The next meeting, they are 20, and the next time, they are 19, 18, 17. And to compare that, he said, oh, really, it's no more like that I'm coming for support, but I'm coming for life. And he said, this is life support group, it's not death support group. And this is matter really a lot.
We have a woman from Haiti who said that HIV is no longer a death sentence.
Because she was saying that she referring to, she heard her friend passed away, and she was asking, is she HIV positive? And she found out that no, she had a cancer. And she said, then HIV for me is no more death sentence. I can live longer, yeah.
We'd like to acknowledge Khaled Salem, the ACO Executive Director, also CHIO Administration, CHIO HIV team, and ACO for being open to that collaboration. The families, really, this is really important for us, the families that have embraced our support and this relationship and collaboration, and individuals who agreed for their photo to be taken for this presentation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, in the interest of time, we won't have any time for any questions for this great presentation, but we will be listening to our next presentation from Rosalind Balzer-Dutourier and Patrick McDougall on PRA learning modules for community-based organizations seeking to be more involved with research incorporating JIPA-MIPA principles.
Hi, my name is Patrick McDougall, and I work at the Dr. Peters Center. I'd like to thank CAHR and the efforts that created this special session. And I'm very pleased to be representing our team today for this presentation. Our team includes Rosalind Balzer-Dutourier, Darren Loescher, Elena McHattie, and Grace Delgarno, but as with many CBR projects, the team that I just mentioned really is just the tip of the iceberg. There are 15 community advisory committee members and others that Darren interviewed to build this project. And then there are the clients and staff of the Dr. Peters Center and external researchers who shaped this project as well. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. The issue that this project addresses is that increasingly community-based organizations are employing peer research associates on HIV research projects. But there are a few published models or dynamic how-to guides for community-based organizations seeking to integrate PRAs on research projects. Our project sought to address this gap. And just a quick word on the organization that I'm with. The Dr. Peters Center is a not-for-profit, community-based HIV healthcare facility located in Vancouver. It provides care to people who are living with HIV who are also coping with multiple other health and social issues, such as mental health conditions, addiction, hepatitis C, physical disabilities, trauma, limited or no family or social support, unstable housing situation, and limited financial support. And for this project, we documented the Dr. Peters Center's experience of recruiting, hiring, training, orientating, supervising, and mentoring PRAs for a 3-year CBR project called the Dr. Peters Study. The Dr. Peters Study is led by Dr. Bob Hogg, and he delegated the responsibility for employing PRAs for the project to the Dr. Peters Center. And we're very grateful for him having asked us to do this, as it was a new thing for us, and it launched something for our organization. To roadmap our process, we hired an external consultant, Darren Loescher, to interview folks who had shaped the hiring process and individuals who were hired. Darren is an experienced PRA who is involved with a number of organizations at the board level and other levels of operations. With Darren, we created an interview guide, and then he interviewed influencers and decision makers on our project, such as community advisory committee members. That includes 4 Dr. Peter Center clients, a former board member, a donor, some of our funders, and external community members, as well as PRAs, a peer mentor, research coordinator, and our executive director. Darren then synthesized the findings with Elena McHattie, an independent consultant, and then she developed them into 6 Prezi-based learning modules. So here's a screenshot of the homepage for the Prezi-based learning modules. And in the time that we have, I can't go online to access the Prezis, but there are 6 narrated modules on imagining the role of the PRA on a project, recruitment, selection, and hiring, training and orientation, supervising and mentoring, and we also created an executive summary as well as a module specifically designed for executive directors and boards of directors of community-based organizations. Once a module is selected, viewers can start the presentation with audio and enter into full screen mode. The modules follow a consistent structure discussing what we did for our process at the Dr. Peter Center, the impacts that it had at our organization, and some of the things that the viewer may wish to consider in the context of their organization. The Prezis have visuals, narration, and quotes integrated throughout. And I wanted to add for this one module for boards of directors and executive directors, I wanted to say that that was Darren's idea, and likely as a result of the fact that he sits on many boards. So he knows the particular question that executive directors and directors of a board are interested in. So with 85 minutes of content in the PRA learning modules, I can't go into all the findings, but I wanted to share some highlights from Darren's interviews. The first was the importance to the Dr. Peter Center clients that there was this deliberate decision to seek PRAs with experiences and identities in common with Dr. Peter Center clients. A second highlight was the support for transitions involved for PRAs as they took on different roles. So for example, the identity shift going from being a Dr. Peter Center client to being a Dr. Peter Center client and now also an employee at the same time. And similarly, for other clients, the transition as this individual goes from being a peer to now they are a peer and a PRA. And similarly for Dr. Peter Center staff, the transition as that individual goes from being a client and to now being a client and a colleague. The third highlight that I'd just like to underline was the value of the peer mentor in supporting these transitions. Darren also heard about the importance and the value of the PRA role at the Dr. Peter Center from many perspectives. And this echoes some things that we've already heard and I think are really worth emphasizing. Some of the language that Darren was communicating to me as we were preparing this presentation was of the value of engaging people living with HIV and valuing their humanity, and the unvictimizing and destigmatizing that the PRA role brought. Darren also heard that there was a better post-survey sense of self for the survey participants with PRAs doing the surveys. And one quote that he wanted us to add into this presentation was that in particular, there's this sense that I understand your journey even if we didn't walk exactly the same path. Darren also heard about the value of the planning that went into the process and the importance of the organizational buy-in and capacity to support the plan that we had developed, and the ripple effect on subsequent projects at the organization, at the Dr. Peter Center. We've now, just in a couple years, we've now worked with 12 different PRAs on different projects. And there were a few lessons learned that I wanted to, thank you, Trevor, that I wanted to highlight. In particular, the value of engaging a multifaceted, independent PRA to do this process evaluation for us. And in particular, Darren's experience at being on different boards and having worked as a PRA, kind of in working groups, working with policymakers, academia, the medical community, and researchers, and as a volunteer at CBOs and ASOs, that really shaped this project. And there's a lot of that experience in this community that we can draw from. And the trust piece that Darren brought. Darren is part of the fabric of the community, and he's not taking the information and leaving. Finally, I wanted to highlight some lessons learned from a knowledge translation perspective. The PRA learning modules were disseminated to ASOs, CBOs, researchers, and policymakers in December 2014, and initial responses were extremely positive. We found that using Prezi to communicate this model to other community-based organizations had several advantages. It's inexpensive, and it's a web-based platform that can be developed by multiple parties working from different locations, and then it can be disseminated easily. Audio recordings for slide narration can be easily made and revised, for a single slide, so you don't need to completely revise the whole presentation each time. And unlike academic papers with codified rules and language, this knowledge translation strategy allowed us to cover multiple topics relevant to community-based organizations while using accessible language. Thanks very much. I'd also like to acknowledge that project funding was provided through the VIV Healthcare Positive Action Canada HIV/AIDS Innovation Program 2013. And I'd also really like to acknowledge everyone who was interviewed for this project, PRAs, Community Advisory Committee members, Dr. Peters Center staff, the Dr. Peters study team members, and in particular our peer mentor, Terry Howard. And here is the address of the learning modules, and I can also send them to you via email too. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, I know you said the peers were interviewed by Darren.
Yeah.
As a really experienced peer. I'm just wondering, were the peers also actively involved in the development process of the modules? Were there other capacity building opportunities where they were involved, and just other areas for them to actively participate in the process?
That's a great question. And the answer is we mostly focused on doing the interviews and as a means of Darren doing the interviews with, I think he interviewed about 18 people. And from that point on, we worked on just synthesizing the findings and getting them into the Prezis, but certainly an area we could have improved on, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Trevor.
Next, we have James Wilton and Alan Lee presenting on exploring the roles of community-based organizations in the rollout of HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, among Toronto gay, bisexual, and other MSM.
Great, thank you very much. I just want to start off by thanking the CAHR organizers for having us here today. My name is James Wilton. I work at Katie, and my co-presenter here is Alan Lee, who's with the Regent Park Community Health Centre, as well as the Committee for Accessible AIDS Treatment. And we're presenting on behalf of all our colleagues here. So this is Alan Lee's and I's conflict disclosure slide. So HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis is an emerging strategy to prevent the transmission of HIV, and it's been found effective in several different populations, including heterosexual men and women, people who use injection drugs, and gay men and other men who have sex with men. And in Canada, gay men are heavily affected by HIV, and it's a potential strategy to reduce incidence among that population in Canada. And as we know, currently PrEP is not being approved by Health Canada, but it is available through off-label prescriptions from a healthcare provider. And so as interest continues to grow in this prevention tool, there's sort of a widespread concern among service providers that HIV prevention will become medicalized, and this will really start to draw a focus away from some of the psychosocial factors involved in HIV transmission, and also sort of diminish the role of community-based organizations because it is a prescription drug that has to be provided by a medical doctor. And therefore, there's sort of this sense of uncertainty among community-based organizations around the role they can play in the rollout of this so-called biomedical intervention. And so because of this, we decided we wanted to invite representatives from a bunch of different Toronto-based organizations and agencies serving a range of gay men and other men who have sex with men in Toronto. And we did this to really explore their potential role in PrEP implementation and to sort of explore their fears, hopes, and needs around PrEP. So we held our first session on December 10th, 2014, and we're planning 3 more over the next year or so. And these sessions are actually happening concurrently with the Preparatory 5 project, which is a small pilot project, which is actually providing PrEP to about 50 gay men and other men who have sex with men out of St. Michael's Hospital here. And so at the think tank, we asked participants to complete a brief survey, which sort of tried to capture some of their thoughts about PrEP, and also a bit about their knowledge on a Likert scale sort of questions. And also at this session, Alan and I facilitated some small group discussions to explore hopes, concerns, and their potential roles. And so these were more of our concrete objectives, not just for this think tank, but for all the think tanks. So to identify ways that community-based organizations can contribute to a new HIV prevention paradigm that includes PrEP, to identify what PrEP-related services are needed at the CBO level, and sort of to co-develop a CBO action agenda to sort of involve CBOs in meaningful ways in moving PrEP into practice. So just a bit about who attended. So we invited 26, as I mentioned, and most agreed to participate. 1 declined and 3 did not respond. 17 organizations actually attended the think tank, and 20 completed the survey. So we actually sent the survey out to those who were unable to attend. And this is just a bit about the different organizations that were able to make it. So about half were ASOs, and we also had quite of a broad range, and not just organizations working in HIV, but also people working, organizations working in gay men's health that wasn't specific to HIV, such as some mental health organizations. So it really was a unique opportunity for, you know, all these different organizations to get together and sort of discuss PrEP, and I think it was one of the first opportunities that they had to do this. So just a little bit of results from the survey. So we can see here that about 55% said they actually have provided PrEP-related services. 70% rated their knowledge level about PrEP as knowledgeable or very knowledgeable. 80% said they were comfortable sharing information with PrEP with clients, so that suggests support for PrEP. But you can see that the number who have actually provided PrEP-related services is actually much lower. So again, there might be that uncertainty around you know, what services organizations can provide that go beyond just providing information.
And then, if I'm shaking, it's because it's cold. It's also because it's exciting research. So, so the following is about some of the summaries of the first think tank discussion we have. So we asked people about what are their hopes and concerns about PrEP. So in terms of the hopes, and potential benefits, a lot of people really do appreciate the fact that it is an effective way of preventing HIV transmission. And in addition to that, it does have a lot of potential mental health benefits in terms of it is something that you can take yourself. You don't need to depend on your partners to put on a condom, for example. So it gives an increased sense of self-efficacy and empowerment to some people and reduces anxiety and fear and shame. And people also talk about potential broader community benefits in terms of, you know, the opportunity to engage people for PrEP is an opportunity to discuss broader health issues, address social determinants, syndemic issues, as well as getting people engaged with broader community connections. There's a potential to reduce stigma around HIV, around the divide between seropositive and seronegative MSMs, and reduce isolation and loneliness amongst gay men. It well, if our government is enlightened enough, it might even have a potential benefit to alleviate the burden of criminalization. So, how do you do this thing? However, despite all these potential benefits, people do have articulate a lot of concerns. And some of the potential benefits is also like a little bit of a double-edged sword. For example, there is also the potential of increasing stigma, both in terms of people presuming that PrEP users might be positive, or they are just, Truvada whore, as some participant said. People have concerns about the long-term safety, potential side effects, toxicity, and efficacy of the medicine, as well as people's adherence to really using it appropriately long-term or episodically. There's concern about risk compensation in terms of how people might engage in new sexual networks that are more bad-backing and engage in more risk behaviors. But a lot of the concerns really relates to the issues of access. So first of all, there is a concern about the lack of universal access. So people fear that, participants fear that the MSM world might be divided into people, MSM who can afford PrEP versus MSM who are not able to afford or have access to PrEP, right? And it might exacerbate inequities that's already dividing some of the MSM communities, including people who faces a lot of barriers in accessing basic services, people with mental health challenges, marginalized communities such as Aboriginal, racialized, newcomer communities. And I think as James talked about earlier, people are concerned about the medicalization of HIV prevention and taking away the attention of addressing social determinants. So if you can take a pill to prevent infection, then there's less reason for people to engage and pay attention, and there might be less attention for governments. Maybe more excuse for governments to not fund community programs that address other social issues. So, sorry, I'm not doing this. However, despite the concerns, the MSM community is a very resilient community, and we've been through a lot, and we definitely wanted to make this work. So people do see there is a potential role for community-based partnerships in promoting, educating, raising awareness in PrEP, identifying and assessing potential PrEP users who would benefit from access to PrEP, and supporting the decisions related to uptake of PrEP, facilitating access, and assisting clients in integrating PrEP into their life and addressing other social issues. And I think there's a collective will to advocate for funding and financial coverage to maximize coverage and access to PrEP. But I think there is also a lot of practical issues that people are concerned about in terms of their appropriateness of their role. And as James talked about, it is a prescription drug and needs to be prescribed clinically, and community-based organization has not been traditionally engaged in those roles, and specific guidelines and directives and partnership needs to be developed. So some of the, there's a long list of things that we need to do, but some of the highlights include the attention to improving access to culturally competent services related to PrEP and interventions to address the needs, so that we can ensure that the medication is not the only focus, but people also get their other health needs addressed. Providers and community members need educational resources to increase knowledge and awareness, both for service providers and for PrEP users. And there needs to be a really clear roadmap and also community mapping of resources related to the whole continuum of services supporting PrEP. There needs to be clear guidelines, regulatory approval, and coverage for PrEP, and obviously funding to support all these initiatives. So that's all from our first think tank. So that's basically just maps out a lot of work ahead of us. So we are having 3 more think tanks. The goal is to co-develop an action agenda so that we could ensure that PrEP is integrated in a holistic way as part of a whole prevention continuum and strategies. So our next session is actually scheduled for May 5th. And there'll be two more subsequent sessions to develop the action agenda based on people's concerns. And we would also be informed by the Preparatory 5 project's findings as we enroll and learn from the lived experiences of people engaged in PrEP. And also, I think community action is already beginning to take place. There's an open letter from the Health Initiative for Men to ask Gilead to increase access to PrEP. So if people and community members and agencies are interested, please do sign that petition. And so finally, we'd like to thank all the participants of the think tank and also of the research project, all the team members and the coordinators that help facilitate the organizing of the think tank sessions and the funder for the project. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Thank you to both of you for that presentation. I was just wondering, apart from the PrEP study, which has guided delivery of the PrEP, anecdotally, I have been hearing stories in my own province of a bit of pushback from doctors in regards to it being off-label, not having enough understanding of what's going on to be able to prescribe, et cetera. Do you have anything sort of planned in terms of how to educate the medical professionals that would be dealing with this, or any way of sort of alleviating the pushback that people might get?
Yeah, I think a concern that was identified in this was the low awareness among medical providers and perhaps low willingness to prescribe or judgmental attitudes towards PrEP. So hopefully something that comes out of this will be how to address, or what role community-based organizations can play in addressing that concern. And also, I think regulatory approval would probably go a long way in, making healthcare providers more comfortable providing it, but also improving awareness. Yeah.
Francisco's making me do all the work, so I'm going to continue. Shazia Islam and Vijaya Chikirmain are going to be presenting on More Than Fiction, Pause Women Share Their Stories, the ASAP Anthology Project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to CAHR for making this space happen. My name is Vijaya, and my co-presenter, Shazia. We're both with ASAP, the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, and just to start off, we have no conflicts to declare. So is it this little? Green button. Oh, God. It looks like I'm playing a video game. Okay. So the name of this project, More Than Fiction, Pause Women Share Their Stories. These are a couple of things that we're going to cover, but I'll try and go through some of this pretty quickly. So about ASAP, we're similar to other ASOs, or AIDS service organizations, around the province. We're based in Toronto. We're ethno-racial. We serve specifically South Asian communities. We provide support, education, and community development, and a number of different projects. For more about us, you can go to our website. The project was situated within one of our women's programs called ELAN, which means Empowerment, Love, and Networking for South Asian Women. It was the first support program exclusively for female-identified clients or women living with HIV that began in 2011. And we really felt like we needed one because of the complex and high needs in our client base for women. So we think that this is really important because a really unique aspect of this project is that it came directly from South Asian PAWS women. So it's very, very community driven. And many of our women are, they participate in all sorts of research projects, and I think sometimes the sample, when you have a larger research study and the South Asian women sample is fairly small, they're not always statistically relevant. And so that can be really frustrating because a lot of the clients are participating in these studies, they're spending their time and sharing their stories, but don't always see an end to that. So they start something, but they're not seeing the end. And I think that's what drove them to come to us and say, well, let's do something on our own, right? Something that's their voice and that they can own. So we thought we would apply for some funding, and we got both the AIDS Bureau, Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, as well as MacAID's fund to support the project. And we were really just honored to sort of create this platform for women to share their stories. So why storytelling? We believe that this is a really critical and important way to learn and for people to share what is important to them. So it's a very organic process. The authors have ownership. It's not as though we're dictating the terms of their participation or the questions that we would like to be answered. We're not creating any facilitated discussion guides or anything like that. It's a very, very open process. It's very culturally relevant. It's how communities learn from each other. And it's also very creative, but it requires a tremendous amount of self-reflection, because I think when we write, we're forced to answer certain questions, and questions about what does this say about me, and what do I want to say to the world? And sometimes when we start to think about that, it's not as easy as we might think it is to answer that. There are also very safe and accessible ways of building community. So women don't have to use their real names, or it's not a lot of identifying characteristics. Like, they can really pen what they feel is important to them in the way that they want to say it. Yes. Okay.
Okay. This anthology was launched just last year in September, and I think what's really important to say is that there was a lot of work that went into it the months before. One of the important things to say is that when we did put together the consent and confidentiality document, we wanted to make sure that it reflected as close as possible to the desires that were expressed by the women who wanted to create this anthology in the first place. So we wanted to make sure that it reflected their needs and concerns and what they envisioned for this project. Another part of the process was to make sure that we honored their stories with a proper honorarium. So the honorarium that we did give and offer was substantial. Again, honoring their time, their resources, their commitment. And also another thing about acknowledging the stories is that we have 12 stories in this book, but we also were not able to capture all those other stories that came out of the experience, the process of documenting these stories. Okay, so I just said about 12 narratives there. And so those are just some of the titles that you will see in this book. I think hopefully a lot of you already have a copy of the book. If you don't have a copy, then come and speak to us afterwards. So really important, some of the themes that came out of the stories that were written were, again, universal themes. So love, romance, intimacy, sex and sexuality, identity and parenting. And with all of these themes, I think there were definitely issues around navigating those themes. And so therefore, part of the project was to provide peer-based support, but also external support for the writers. Let me go back to that. How do I go back to that? Okay, so we thought it might be really important to share some of the quotes from the book. And here we have Prose for the Man with the Harley. I don't know if you want to read it, yeah.
So all I knew at the time was that around me, people with HIV were dying, and that I too was dying. I wanted to experience a Harley ride before my time was up. I was determined to meet its owner. So this is a quote from Prose for the Man with the Harley. Some days, as I watch my toes sink into the warm white sands, I can also hear the joyous sounds of a wedding ceremony or a summer gathering of friends. The beach brings people together, and as I listen and observe, all those special memories people are forming become part of mine too. From My Beach Oasis by Esta Noche.
And I just want to speak to this one a little bit because we have been giving talks about the anthology at different community spaces. And one of the questions that comes up, or that has come up, is, are these stories all about HIV? Like, do they mention HIV in the stories? And I mean, the majority of stories they do mention, they do talk about their diagnosis. But this story in particular didn't go into that because they wanted to really focus on how fantasy and daydreaming are also part of healing and managing the illness. Really, really interesting and really good point.
Whenever you talk of these things, I trick myself into dreaming that dream with you. Like I could just forget for a moment that I actually adore women, and that I'm gender fluid, and that I'm HIV positive. Letter to My Mother by Neil.
And then, of course, we need to talk about the intersectionalities. And all of these came through in the stories, but also the reality around making sure that the writers could participate in the workshops in the process was also a challenge because all around them, they were experiencing those intersections. So some of them include HIV disclosure, gender-based violence, stigma and discrimination, poverty, mental health challenges, and then, of course, the day-to-day challenges of living with a chronic illness.
So I cope with my illness one day at a time. Sometimes I'm okay, sometimes I'm down. I'm alone a lot, wondering what each day will bring. It tears me up inside knowing that I have an illness I can't even talk about with the people closest to me, to whom it may concern, by Savitri. My mind is always full of plans. Now I am doing some more training in the areas I'm interested in. I have already planned my next step. I know that my life can stop anytime and anywhere, but I will continue planning for my future so that I can fulfill my life's purpose. A Life of Service and Caring by Archana.
Okay, you want to speak to that?
Sure. So there were many outcomes to this project. It's still ongoing, and we actually just heard a couple of weeks ago from MacAids that we're able to do it for a second year and with a larger group of people that we work with. So we're really excited about that. We had over 300 copies of the anthology in print, and we also have about an online version, and they've all been shared. We try and workshop them with community groups as much as we can because we really think it's important to have context when we're doing this. We've done trainings with our own volunteer groups, and the level, like the difference in when we do an HIV 101, for example, and we do this, or we do a Stigma 101 and we do this, is really palpable because people share so much more. Like the participants are relating these experiences to their own, and they're not separated from it. There's not as much of a disassociation with it, which we think is really telling. We also did focus groups. We also conducted focus groups with the women because we wanted to also capture some of the outcomes and the effects that participating in this process had for the women in the program and our authors. So so these are some of the feedback from the writers. I no longer felt shame about my experience. I felt that I was the only one going through hell, but after reading the other stories, I thought it was remarkable that these women survived. If they could do it, I could do it. They gave me a sense of enjoyment, of tranquility. It gave us an idea of what our group still needs to work on in our relationship with one another. So I think it demonstrates that there was a lot of self-reflection that went into the process, and it really had an impact on women, but also there was a sense of impact within the group dynamic. So as anyone here who's done support group work will know, that there's a lot of work that goes into creating a trusting and strong dynamic within the group. And so it really helped in that process as well. So very quickly, we had a number of different implications. What we want to try and do is scale this up. What we want to do is also create a program manual that we're developing with support from the OHTN. But I think what we really wanted to focus on is the two implications that this has for research. One, I think, in terms of knowledge, I think it really questions how we collect knowledge. I would say data, but I don't want to call this data, but the information and the knowledge that's in this resource is so important for service providers to know, especially if you're trying to do work with this community. But at the same time, I think doesn't really follow the guidelines of, you know, the way academic research is supposed to happen. So how do we reconcile that relationship where we're creating knowledge, and how do we validate that, but also recognize that it's outside of the bounds of how it typically gets validated? So I think there's definitely implications in this. And there's also, and the other research implication is that there are many ways to change this and to work this into other projects. So it's already been the foundation of another project that we're doing to test the model of stories as sexual health education tool. And we had a poster upstairs about that. But I think those are the two that we really wanted to focus on. Yeah. And these are our authors. So when we launched the anthology, we had a community launch, and we had this cake for all our authors, because it was also really difficult knowing that many of the women who did pen these stories were not able to come up and talk about it in the way that, you know, you would if, I guess, you wrote something, right? And it's like, this is my work, or this is what I'm doing. So, and a lot of women were okay with that. They weren't actually not, but you know, some of them weren't. So it's something to consider. It's that the importance of continuing to do this work, because that stigma is still so present. But we had, so this is the quote from a song by, I don't know, who is it?
Josh Groban.
Okay. Called "You Raise Us Up."
Yes. Actually, I just want to make one really quick point about the anonymity and the use of pseudonyms. What came up in the focus group was that a lot of the participants felt that because they were able to use pseudonyms, they were able to write a lot more and share a lot more, because they felt this sort of sense of like freedom to be able to say what they needed to say.
And just the acknowledgements to all our funders, our facilitators, and the project team, who some of you are here today. So Lori Chambers. Yay! Mubni Morshad, who is no longer with, but we also had support from Women's Health, Women's Hands, and of course others in our community. So thank you.
Oh yeah, and the first 3 people who run up to the stage will get a copy.
Please don't run.
Don't run.
Partially because we started late, and also everyone's very enthusiastic about their presentations, and we've gone over a little bit. We'll probably just move on to our next presentation. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.
So for our next presentation, last presentation, Brent Oliver and Wendy Porch will be presenting on the benefits and challenges of vocational rehabilitation services and assisting people living with HIV to work successfully, implications for community practice.
Thank you. So this evening I'll be discussing employment support programs for people living with HIV and findings from a doctoral research study. So I'm hoping to focus on what we learned about programs and supports that are currently working well now, as well as focusing a little bit in more depth around some ideas that we could perhaps integrate a little bit better within our programs in Canada to support successful employment outcomes for people living with HIV. So my co-author, Wendy Porch, is here tonight. Catherine Worthington's not with us, down in front. And I would encourage you to, I know we're running over, and I would encourage you to approach either of us after this presentation if you'd like to discuss employment concerns further or wanted to connect to more resources. In fact, it looks like there's a whole Quigger table there, so I'm sure any of them would be happy to speak with you. So it's well established that there are various challenges and obstacles related to employment for people living with HIV, and this has generally led to relatively low employment outcomes in pretty much any jurisdiction the research has looked about at this point, and particularly here in Canada. However, we also know that positive employment outcomes are associated with receiving effective vocational counseling and employment supports. The premise for today's session, community practice, is consistent with the objectives for this particular research, again, which was part of my doctoral research project and was conducted in partnership with community service providers like CAHR, as well as Employment Action at the AIDS Community of Toronto, and HIV Community Link in Calgary, formerly known as AIDS Calgary. In completing this qualitative study, we spoke with 31 participants who were people living with HIV from 3 provinces, British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario, about the kinds of factors that supported their success in working and managing their illness. One important distinction to note here is that all of participants had been working successfully, and this varied a bit from previous research that's been done. In the case of this study, that meant that 3 months, that people were generally working 3 months or more, and were in a variety of jobs that ranged from part-time, casual, or contract positions for as little, in some cases, 3 or 4 months, up to some individuals who had long been in the workplace, and in some cases up to 18 years, and were also in full-time professional positions. So there was just a fair range of the types of work people were engaged in. As part of the interviews, participants were questioned about the kind of employment supports they received as part of their vocational experiences and transitions. Majority of study participants, in fact, had received some form of vocational services, whether that be from an HIV-specific employment support provider or from a mainstream voc rehab provider. Very few, there were some, about 30% or 10 participants reported that they had received no vocational supports whatsoever as part of their workplace journey. So the 6 factors that are up on the slide now represent what we learned from people who have a history of working successfully in Canada. The first 3 I'm going to cover really quickly because I think they are well integrated into some of the programming we're seeing at this point. And then the second 3 will kind of focus in more depth, because I think those give us some things to think about in terms of how we might structure or think about providing employment supports moving forward, and how we might supplement some of what's happening now. So study findings validated several factors that are already both well covered in the research literature and, in fact, effectively structured into many employment support programs. In this respect, these findings add to the growing body of evidence suggesting that personal level interventions, things like you see here, social and emotional support, skill development, or support to address stigma and discrimination, can be very successful at assisting people living with HIV to successfully work. This was particularly the case for participants who may have been struggling with the transitions related to the episodic nature of the illness, and who may have needed some additional support to deal with stigma and discrimination in the workplace on a variety of levels. And unfortunately, those experiences were still commonly reported and still happening. So data on these particular factors, as I mentioned, have been previously established in the literature, and many employment services have been structured around these components when supporting people with their employment goals. So as we broaden our scope, findings from the study also identified what I think are some interesting factors that might be worth considering if you're thinking about planning an employment support program or already providing employment supports. The first is in the area of peer support. As we can see from this particular quote, peer support can have an extremely powerful effect for individuals. This participant was able to speak with another person who had experienced similar struggles, and this was extremely helpful, enabled him to connect with someone who had confidence in him and who believed in him, even if perhaps at the time he didn't entirely believe he could do it himself. So peer support and peer mentorship that allowed people living with HIV to learn from each other's experiences were a vocational service need discussed by many. Unfortunately, if we look across the landscape, peer programs are rarely structured into vocational services, and very few participants in this study reported receiving such a service. Similar to peer support, study findings also indicated that many people living with HIV value services above and beyond one-to-one or case management approaches. In particular, support groups were valued by many participants as an alternative or, in fact, as a supplement to individual and case management approaches. This participant described the inspiration he drew from others in a peer support program group, and the kind of value he drew from connecting with others who he saw as role models. Again, when we look at the research literature and the field of practice, group interventions are not often featured as part of vocational programming. The next two slides illustrate the importance of thinking more broadly about how to structure vocational supports for people living with HIV. As you can see from the next two quotes, several participants explicitly linked leadership development and capacity building to their success in employment. For instance, this particular participant acknowledged how participation in AIDS service organization training initiatives were preparing him for a new vocational role and possible full-time employment. All study participants who had similar experiences with a leadership program described these initiatives as important bridges to fuller participation in the community and, in some cases, subsequent employment. For example, here, this participant recalled how participation in a regional program offered by a provincial AIDS service organization assisted him in improving and developing employable skills. While not explicitly developed as vocational interventions, leadership development programs delivered by AIDS service organizations assisted many participants to work successfully. These programs were seen by a variety of participants as contributing to community engagement and supporting their vocational development, skills that were valuable in a variety of work settings and that helped individuals transition into different types of employment and, in some cases, new career paths. Thus, peer programming, group interventions, leadership programs, and capacity building efforts developed by networks of AIDS service organizations were valued by many study participants as critical learning experiences that reflect an increasing focus on the role of participation and empowerment. Interventions that more fully integrated the JIPA principles into vocational programming. These kinds of employment supports offer collective rather than simply individualized interventions that facilitated positive interactions with community structures that then helped many participants find meaning, develop vocational purpose, and reinvent themselves in a new vocational role. These strategies, if increasingly implemented by those providing vocational services to people living with HIV, would represent a shift from traditional vocational service delivery that's been focused on case management and individualized approaches to those that more readily embody JIPA principles and empowerment approaches. Thank you. Just wanted to thank you, my doctoral committee, those who were interviewed and participated in the study, and the organizations, including CAHR, that supported and helped. Thank you.
We have time for one short question, and then we got to get going.
Sorry, it's not a question, and I apologize in advance for inserting myself in here, and it's unfortunate that we've lost so many people. But I just wanted to say, I'm Terry Howard. I am our community representative on the board of directors for CAHR, the organizing committee, and as such, I work behind the scenes in between conferences to make sure that this sort of thing and the community concerns are brought forward. But I want to publicly commend and thank this year's co-chairs, Trevor and Daryl, for making this special session happen. And I think it's really, really important that we continue this on. So you can help me, and you can help people like Daryl and Trevor to make sure that in Winnipeg we also have a session I'm going to shoot for a lunchtime session so that we can get everybody to hear all of this important work. And you can help me do that by filling in your evaluations and saying how important you think and how valuable it is to have this kind of session. Thanks. Sorry to hijack that.
That was a fine hijack, but we're still out of time. Thank you so much, and thanks for showing up to this special session. Let's do more of it.